Hello everyone. This lecture will be looking at the concept of environmental justice. This is Dr. Raymond Shangay. I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation. For those who are in environmental biology, you have your reading assignment. Those that are in environmental justice, environmental science, and other courses, you have my information. Please contact me if there's trouble in getting the other material. So, when speaking of environmental justice, we want to first define each of these words so we have a concept of what concept we're targeting. Justice is fairness and moral rightness, right? It could be a scheme or a set of law in which every person receives their just due, including both their natural and legal rights. The environment, most appropriately, the circumstances or conditions that surround one, right? But we're going to be looking at this more intently at this second definition, right? It's a more of an ecological definition, right? The totality of circumstances surrounding an organism or group of organisms, right? The combination of external physical conditions that affect and influence growth, development, and survival, and the complex of social and cultural conditions affecting the nature of an individual or a community, right? So the environment is this physical, this biological, this chemical presence immediately surrounding both human communities and the communities of organisms that we find around us in our ecosystem. So then we put the two together. The agency that has most of the jurisdiction of environmental justice, the EPA, and they define it as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, right? So, I mean, one of the things that charged this entire movement was the coming out of the civil rights era and a realization that not only was it law and policy at the level of social inclusion and economic inclusion, but this distribution of environmental benefits was also affecting these communities, predominantly African American at the time this realization was happening. So one of those people in that movement was Benjamin Chavis, and he originally defined environmental racism as racial discrimination in environmental policy making and the unequal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. It is the deliberate targeting of people of color in their communities for toxic waste facilities, and the official sanctioning of life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in those communities. It has also been manifested as the lack of inclusion of leadership in the environmental movement of people of color. Okay? Now, when we speak about environmental injustice, the solution has to be a sustainable one, because the problem is highly complex, right? We talked about this issue of racism, which is a social issue, but we also talked about the environment and pollution, right? A ecological and environmental issue as well. But then you can understand the economic underpinnings of placing people or placing pollutants in a community of people who are already economically marginalized, right? So when we deal with environmental justice, we normally talk about four types of justice: distributive, procedural, corrective, and social. They can be defined clearly if you just look at the first name of these types of justice. So distributed justice basically deals with the equal distribution of both the benefits and burdens of the natural resources in the ecosystem. Procedural justice, it means that the decisions that are made are informed by all of those involved. Right? All the stakeholders involved are at the table making the decision. Corrective justice. Corrective justice is when the causal or responsible entity for pollution, regardless of their class or economic standing, is charged to go back and provide the resources to clean up the pollution. And social justice, basically it deals with the race, the class, those struggles that are that have been known as long as this country has existed, to be tied to environmental injustice. So, in order to understand the environmental justice movement, you should be familiar with the basic structure of government. We have the legislative that makes the laws, the executive that enforces the law, the judiciary that interprets the law. Right? So legislative, we have a bicameral Congress, in which we have the House and the Senate. Right? All the fighting that you see going on the television is them supposedly attempting to write law. Right? The executive, that's the president, as well as his agencies. Right? They enforce the law. They write the regulations, and they monitor the people. The judiciary interprets the law. Right? Once a supposed violation has occurred, it's taken to the judicial system to interpret the law in that specific situation. Okay, so the agencies, as I said, under the branch, they will write the regulations. They will take the law, which is usually very general in language, and then they will then give an actual quantitative regulation to say how much of a pollutant people can be exposed to. Right? That way, when the judiciary comes back and make a ruling, is based upon the regulations that have come with the law. But those regulations can sometimes be overturned. Right? But in doing that, the agency is quasi-legislative because they're writing in addition to the law. Okay? No PCBs. Agency then says, oh, by the way, what we mean by that is that a person cannot be exposed to greater than 10 ppm of PCBs or any other pollutant over an 8-hour workday. Okay? That's the role that the agencies play in writing regulations. In order to write a regulation, right, the agency gets together, they have a team, they propose a regulation based upon the law. They then take it to the public at a public hearing for their feedback, and then modifications are made to the regulation based upon that feedback, and then the final rule is published in the Federal Register, right, where it then becomes enforceable. Okay, so the next few slides are just some facts and a short timeline of some of the things that have happened throughout the environmental justice movement. But I would like to move to Executive Order 12898, signed by President Clinton in 1994. The executive order directed 17 federal agencies to develop environmental justice strategies to aid them in identifying and addressing this disproportionately high adverse human health and environmental effects of federal programs, federal policies, and federal activities on minority and low-income populations. So this executive order was basically to ask federal agencies to correct anything that they may have as policy or program that may lead to the unequal distribution of the burdens and benefits of the environment, that may add to the social inequality based upon natural resources, that may allow companies to get away with pollution in underserved communities, or that may stop those communities from participating in the decision making. Okay, so this idea of environmental justice isn't just one that impacts us nationally. It is an international problem as well. Because if you look at the global economy, it's directed in such a way of consumption, right? And the United Nations had a Millennium Ecosystem Assessment where they saw that human economic activity was responsible for some of these issues of environmental destruction, such as climate change, desertification, deforestation, degradation of arable land, etc., etc. And what has also been found is that these loss of ecosystem services and natural resources is geographically tied to underdeveloped countries and regions throughout the world. So, when we look at this inequality, idea begins to form, which others have identified as the global north versus the global south. If you look in north of the hemisphere, north of the equator, in the northern hemisphere, we will find the majority of the developed countries in the world, right? The United States, all the nations of the EU, Canada, Russia, China. These countries are developed, and their evolution of development has produced a majority of the environmental issues on the planet. For instance, 20% of the world's population in those global north countries are responsible for the consumption of 85% of the planet's timber, 70% of its energy, 60% of its food, and greater than 90% of its hazardous waste. They then ship this hazardous waste to the southern countries, while extracting these natural resources I just talked about from those southern countries. Right? Global inequality at the greatest scale, on the greatest stage. So, in looking at our 4 parts of justice, what does that mean on the world stage? It means that we have to look at the distribution of the timber, of the food, of the water, equally across all nations, right? Irrespective of their point of development. They also need to all be brought to the table, right? So these summits, the G20 summit, right? These summits that are just inviting the big boys to the table, where they're making law, international policy for the underdeveloped countries, equals environmental injustice. Corrective justice would then also call for these larger nations to be responsible for the correction of the environmental injustice that we see in these other countries. Social justice then will recognize that in addition to all of these injustices that we see, that there's still the undertone of race and class and international environmental justice as well. So when we begin to look at solutions, we have to go back to our idea of sustainability. There is of soft spot or sweet spot that we must hit, that is in between social, environment, and economic development. Right? One of the suggestions has been to develop a green economy. So turn the international, national economy from one of consumption to one of remediation. Instead of exploitation, looking at developing. Right? So greening the economy refers to the process of reconfiguring businesses and infrastructure to deliver better returns on natural, human, and economic capital investments, while at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions, extracting and using less natural resources, and creating less waste and reducing social disparities. So how do you do this? Well, you go into these communities that have been adversely affected, and you create the infrastructure for the green economy. You begin to give green jobs, those that deal with waste management, with water management, with food generation, right? The people then become the ultimate resource. And you change from the bottom up and not the top down. Alright, so this comes to an end. And I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, my email is rshange2946@mytu.tuskegee.edu. Please contact me. Those in Biology 140 will see me in lab. If you're not in lab, remember, please contact me. I'll also put my information on Blackboard. Thank you for your time, and I will see you as soon as I can. Thank you.